Those words stared back at me from Daniel's tablet, glowing against the dim kitchen light while my coffee sat untouched in my hands, slowly going cold. The message hit me like a shock to the chest, sending a chill straight through my bloodstream. I couldn't stop thinking about the time. 6 months. 6 solid months. That's how long I had given everything I had to get ready for tomorrow's pitch to Gravora Group. This wasn't just another meeting. This deal was the line between success and failure for our consulting firm, Thornland Analytics. I had poured my heart into it. Every hour, every late night, every detail mattered. My name is Emily Carter, and for 8 years, I'd been building what I truly believed belonged to both of us. Daniel and I started this company together in Portland, Oregon, grinding through 16-hour days in our tiny apartment. We lived on instant noodles, cheap coffee, and pure determination. I handled the strategy. I wrote the proposals, designed the presentations, and made sure every plan was airtight. Daniel played the role of the smooth talker, the guy clients instantly liked. At least that's what I thought back then. His tablet was lying on the kitchen counter, forgotten after he rushed upstairs for what he claimed was an urgent client call. I hadn't meant to touch it. I just bumped it while clearing dishes, and the screen lit up. That's when my stomach dropped. The message had been sent to someone saved as V. Redheart. I didn't need to guess who that was. Lauren, his assistant. The same woman who'd been staying late with him far too often over the past few months. My hands shook as I scrolled up through their conversation. The deeper I went, the worse it got. Months of messages, flirtation, private jokes, plans for life after my divorce from Daniel. They talked openly about forcing me out of the business once the Gravora deal was locked in. He'd even been telling potential investors that I was just background support, while he was the real mind behind Thornland Analytics. The cruelest part of all was how amused they were by my effort. They joked about how hard I was working, about me staying up until 3 a.m. polishing slides and rehearsing every talking point, about how clueless I was. One message made my chest tighten. Baby, you should see her running around thinking this is her big moment. She has no idea tomorrow's the day I finally cut the dead weight. Lauren replied with laughing emojis, followed by a line that made my blood boil. Can't wait to celebrate after. Just you and me running the show. I heard Daniel's footsteps on the stairs. Without thinking, I put the tablet back exactly where it had been and pretended to load the dishwasher. My thoughts were spiraling, but my face stayed calm. 8 years married to a manipulator had taught me how to hide my emotions when it mattered. Everything okay down here? Daniel asked, sliding his arms around me from behind. His touch used to feel safe. Now it felt like something tightening around my shoulders. Perfect, I said, leaning into him and smiling like nothing was wrong. I was just thinking about tomorrow. I'm really excited about our presentation. He hugged me tighter. Our presentation, he said. That's right, sweetheart. We're going to crush it together. Together. The word almost made me laugh. It was such a beautiful lie. Morning came like any other day, pretending nothing was wrong. I woke up at 6, did my usual yoga and meditation, then went straight to our home office to finish prepping. Daniel was already there, sharp and confident in his navy suit, the one I'd bought him for our anniversary last year. Big day, he said, still staring at his laptop. You feeling ready? More than ready, I answered, sitting at my desk. The presentation was loaded on both our computers, with backups saved to the cloud. Every slide was flawless. Every statistic double-checked. Every argument solid. I'd spent half a year studying Gravora Group, their weaknesses, their competition, their growth plans. This wasn't a pitch. It was a carefully planned strike meant to answer questions before they were even asked. What Daniel didn't know was that I'd been busy that morning in other ways too. I'd made a quiet call to my divorce attorney, Laura Bennett, someone I trusted from past client work. I sent a discreet email to our accountant asking for full financial records. And most important of all, I turned on a recording app on my phone. Around 9, Daniel stood up. I'll make coffee, he said. We've got about an hour. The meeting was scheduled for 10:30, a video call with Gravora Group's leadership in Seattle, along with their legal team and 3 potential investors. I watched him move through the kitchen with the same confidence he always had. He was handsome, I couldn't deny that. Dark hair with just enough gray to look distinguished. green eyes that could win people over fast. A smile that once made me trust him with my life. But this morning I saw him clearly. The way he hummed while he worked. Was he really happy about what he planned to do to me? He came back holding our matching black mugs. The ones we'd bought on our honeymoon in Italy. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Here you go, honey," he said, setting my mug down carefully. "Drink up. You'll need the energy." The coffee looked normal. Smelled normal. Dark roast just the way I liked it. But his smile lingered a little too long. I took a small sip and studied his face. For a split second, I thought I saw satisfaction flash across his expression. "Thanks," I said sweetly. "You always take such good care of me." His phone buzzed. "Lauren, no doubt. I need to hit the bathroom before we start," he said, already walking away. "Can you pull up the presentation?" The second he was out of sight, I moved. Calm. Efficient. I switched our mugs, placing his in front of my computer and mine in front of his. Then I sat back down, opened the presentation and waited. When he returned, he didn't even look at the mug. He took a long sip of what he thought was his coffee and smiled at me, completely unaware. The meeting was about to start. And so was his downfall. At exactly 10:30, the screen filled with faces. Richard Holloway, Gravora Group's CEO, appeared front and center. A sharp-eyed man in his 60s who looked like he missed nothing. Beside him sat Susan Mitchell, their COO, and Michael Alvarez, head of business development. 3 more windows popped onto the screen, revealing the potential investors Daniel had been wooing for months. "Good morning, everyone," Richard said, his voice coming through our speakers loud and clear. "We're looking forward to seeing what Thornland Analytics has put together for us today." Daniel sat up straighter in his chair, that polished, confident smile snapping into place like it always did. "Thank you for the opportunity, Richard. Emily and I have been working nonstop to develop a strategy we believe will dramatically improve your operational efficiency." He made a point of saying Emily and I, clearly trying to frame himself as the lead. But as he lifted his coffee mug for another sip, I noticed something he couldn't hide. His hand was shaking. Just slightly, but enough. "Interesting. Before we get started," I said, cutting in smoothly, "I want to say what an honor this is. Gravora Group's reputation for innovation is well known, and we're genuinely excited about the possibility of partnering with a company that values excellence the way you do." A few of the investors nodded. This was the kind of tone they expected. Professional, respectful, confident. Daniel shot me a quick look. Was that irritation in his eyes? Or was whatever he'd slipped into the coffee already starting to take hold? "Shall we dive in?" he asked, clicking to the first slide. "Our analysis indicates..." He paused, blinking hard. "Our analysis indicates that Gravora Group is facing 3 primary challenges in the current market." His voice still sounded steady, but it was slower than usual. Richard leaned forward slightly, fully engaged. These were seasoned professionals. They wouldn't miss subtle changes. "The first challenge," Daniel continued, "is operational redundancy across your regional offices. Our research shows..." He stopped again, rubbing his temple while reaching for his mug. "Shows that you could increase efficiency by 18% through process streamlining." I studied the investors' faces. They were listening, but something had shifted. Daniel was tripping over words he'd rehearsed 100 times. "The second challenge involves data integration," I said, stepping in without hesitation. "Your current systems operate in silos, which slows decision-making and weakens your competitive position." As I spoke, Daniel took another long swallow of his coffee. The irony was almost poetic. He was undoing himself with the very thing meant for me. I kept my face calm, my tone steady. Everything had to look seamless. "Daniel," I added gently, "would you like to go into the technical details?" He blinked several times, clearly struggling to focus. Yes, absolutely. The technical aspects are fairly complex, but essentially..." His words began to blur together, just enough to be noticeable. Richard's eyebrows lifted slightly. In this world, that kind of lapse during a high-stakes presentation was unforgivable. And Daniel wasn't done yet. "Daniel." Susan Mitchell's voice broke through the silence as he stared blankly at the screen, his mouth slightly open. 20 minutes had passed. What started as mild confusion was now impossible to ignore. "I'm sorry," Daniel said, shaking his head hard. There's something. He reached for his coffee again, drinking like it might fix whatever was wrong. Whatever he'd planned for me was working exactly as intended, just not on the right person. The data integration challenges are significant, he finished weakly. That was when Richard's expression shifted from polite interest to genuine concern. Mr. Carter, he said carefully, are you feeling well? We can reschedule if necessary. There it was. Richard, if I may, I said calmly. Daniel has been pushing himself extremely hard preparing for today. He was up until 4 this morning making final adjustments. Perhaps it would be best if I continue while he takes a moment. It was the perfect move. I sounded supportive and professional, while quietly reframing his behavior as exhaustion, not incompetence. More importantly, I was stepping in to save the deal. That would be appreciated, Michael Alvarez said. We're very interested in hearing the full proposal. Daniel tried to object. No, I'm fine. I can. He attempted to stand, but swayed and had to grab the desk for support. The investors exchanged looks. The kind that said everything without a single word. Please, darling, I said softly, standing and placing a hand on his shoulder. Let me take it from here. You've already done so much. Then I turned back to the camera. I know this proposal inside and out. Daniel and I developed it together as true partners. What I didn't say was that I'd done 90% of the work myself. He'd been the face. I'd been the mind behind every analysis, every recommendation, every solution. I clicked to the next slide and kept going. As I was saying, your data integration issues create a ripple effect throughout your entire operation. Based on our review of your Q3 reports, these delays are costing you between $2 and $3 million in missed opportunities. Now I was exactly where I belonged. This was my element, breaking down complex problems and turning them into clear, profitable solutions. As I spoke, I watched the investors' expressions change. Concern faded into interest. Interest turned into real engagement. Additionally, I said, moving to a detailed chart I'd spent weeks refining, our implementation timeline shows measurable improvements within 90 days, with full optimization achieved in 6 months. Richard leaned back, clearly impressed. These projections are quite aggressive, Mrs. Carter. How confident are you in them? Completely, I said without missing a beat. We've modeled these outcomes using data from 3 comparable companies. In every case, our approach exceeded expectations. Behind me, Daniel struggled to regain control. He'd managed to sit back down, but his skin had gone pale, and he kept blinking as if trying to force his vision to clear. The very thing he'd planned to use to humiliate me was dismantling his credibility in real time. This is impressive work, Susan Mitchell said. The depth of your analysis is exactly what we were hoping to see. Thank you, I replied, genuinely pleased. This project represents months of research and careful strategic planning. We know you're considering several consulting firms for this contract, which is why we made a point to go well beyond surface-level recommendations. As I spoke, I noticed one of the investors, Evelyn Brooks from Callamore Partners, scribbling notes at a rapid pace. That was always encouraging. Out of the corner of my eye, I could also see Daniel struggling with his coffee mug again, clearly baffled by why he felt worse instead of better. The irony was almost beautiful. He had expected to sit back and watch me fall apart, to use my supposed failure as his excuse to push me out of the company we'd built. Instead, he was watching me deliver the strongest performance of my career, while experiencing the very humiliation he'd planned for me. And this was only the beginning. If we could move on to the implementation timeline, I said, clicking ahead to slide 12, you'll see we've structured the project into 3 distinct phases. Each phase includes clear milestones and measurable success metrics. Richard Holloway nodded approvingly, though his attention kept drifting toward Daniel. My husband was now gripping the arms of his chair like the room might tip over at any second. Mr. Carter, Richard said carefully, are you sure you don't need medical assistance? This was the moment I'd been waiting for. You know, I said, as if the thought had just crossed my mind. Daniel, why don't you step away for a few minutes? Get some fresh air, maybe splash some water on your face. I can handle the rest of the presentation. He looked at me, clearly confused. And beneath that confusion I saw something else. Fear. He finally understood that something was very wrong, but he had no idea what. "Yeah, maybe that's a good idea," he muttered, struggling to stand. As he shuffled out of the room, swaying slightly, I turned back to the camera wearing a concerned but professional expression. "I apologize for the interruption," I said. "My husband has been under an incredible amount of pressure lately. He's deeply committed to this project." "Of course," Susan Mitchell replied kindly. "Please continue. This is fascinating." And continue I did. With Daniel gone, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't known in years. This was my work, my expertise, my moment. I moved through the remaining slides with confidence and precision, answering every question with ease and depth. "Your competitive analysis is especially thorough," Michael Alvarez said. "How did you gather such detailed insights into Gravora Group's market position?" 3 months of deep research, I answered honestly. I personally interviewed 15 industry experts, analyzed 5 years of market data, and conducted focus groups with your target demographic. This isn't theoretical. It's based on real-world intelligence. I could see the energy shift across their faces. These were people who respected preparation and rigor, and I'd given them exactly that. All the while, my phone continued recording from where I'd placed it at the start of the meeting. It captured everything: the presentation, Daniel's decline, and my seamless takeover. Evidence I knew would matter later. "Mrs. Carter," Richard said as I approached the final slides, "this level of preparation is exceptional. How long have you been developing these strategies?" "I've been working with variations of this approach for more than 2 years," I said. "Once we learned about the opportunity with Gravora Group, I tailored and refined these ideas specifically for your organization." What I didn't say was that Daniel had contributed almost nothing to the strategy. He'd been busy charming potential clients over expensive dinners while I did the real work of building the business. "The financial projections are strong," Evelyn Brooks added, "but execution is where most consulting engagements fall apart. How do you ensure successful implementation?" I smiled. This was where I truly excelled. "Accountability is built into every phase," I explained. "We conduct weekly progress reports, monthly milestone reviews, and quarterly strategic assessments. And I personally oversee each major implementation step." "You personally?" Richard asked. "Absolutely," I said. "This isn't something we delegate to junior staff. When you work with Thornland Analytics, you get senior-level expertise throughout the entire process." I was careful with my wording. I wasn't criticizing Daniel. I was simply positioning myself based on capability and experience. As we entered the final phase of the presentation, a wave of confidence washed over me. This was going better than I'd ever imagined. And the best part? Daniel was missing his own professional unraveling. When the presentation wrapped up, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Richard looked genuinely excited. Susan was asking thoughtful follow-up questions. The investors were clearly impressed. "Mrs. Carter," Richard said, "this has been outstanding. Is this level of strategic thinking typical of your work?" "It is," I replied without hesitation. "I believe in digging beneath the surface to uncover real opportunities for growth and efficiency." "How soon could you begin implementation if we decide to move forward?" Michael Alvarez asked. "Immediately," I said. "I've already cleared my schedule in anticipation of this project. My full attention would be dedicated to ensuring Gravora Group's success." I made a point of saying I rather than we. It was accurate and intentional. That was when Daniel stumbled back into the room. He looked worse than before. His face was pale, his movements unsteady, and his eyes were clouded with genuine confusion. "How's everything going?" he asked, his words slurring noticeably. The contrast couldn't have been more striking. There I was, calm, composed, and in complete command of the room. And there he was, barely able to form a sentence. The optics couldn't have been worse for him. "We were just discussing implementation timelines," I said gently, the way you'd speak to someone who was clearly not well. "Why don't you sit down, honey?" Richard Holloway's expression had shifted. It wasn't just concern anymore, it was professional evaluation. In this world, dependability was everything, and what he was watching raised serious doubts about whether Daniel could be trusted with a multimillion-dollar engagement. "Mr. Carter," Richard said carefully. Perhaps it would be best to continue this discussion when you're feeling better. No, Daniel said quickly, forcing energy into his voice. I'm fine. Just tired. Let me walk you through the final recommendations. But when he tried to move to the next slide, he clicked the wrong button and closed the presentation entirely. What followed was painful to watch. He fumbled with the mouse, panicked, trying to reopen the file while clearly struggling with basic computer functions. The silence stretched. The investors watched. The damage deepened. It's all right, I said smoothly, already reopening the presentation on my computer and sharing my screen. Technical issues happen. Let's continue. I guided the group through the final points with steady confidence, making Daniel's unraveling seem like a minor interruption instead of the massive red flag it really was. But the truth was clear. They'd seen enough. As the meeting wrapped up, Richard said something that sent a chill straight through me. Mrs. Carter, he said, your expertise is exactly what we're looking for. We'll be in touch very soon with our decision. Not your company's expertise. Not Thornland Analytics' expertise. Mine. When the call ended, Daniel slumped in his chair, pale and exhausted, staring at the desk like it might explain what had just happened. What happened? He asked. I felt fine this morning. You've been pushing yourself too hard, I said gently, layering my voice with false concern. You should probably lie down. I'll handle any follow-up with the clients. As he struggled toward the bedroom, I stayed behind in the office, letting the weight of the moment settle in. The meeting had gone better than I ever could have hoped. Not only had I saved what Daniel tried to sabotage, I might have secured the biggest contract of our careers. And more importantly, I had proof. My phone recording captured everything. His worsening condition, his confusion, and most critically, his admission that he'd felt completely fine before drinking the coffee he'd made that morning. The trap he'd set for me had snapped shut around him instead. Now it was time to set a few of my own. Within an hour, I was already moving into the next phase of my plan. Daniel slept upstairs, worn out by the very substance he'd intended for me, while I worked methodically to protect my future and expose his betrayal. First, I called Laura Bennett. Laura, it's Emily Carter. We need to meet today. I have evidence that my husband attempted to drug me, and documentation showing his plan to take over our business. There was a pause. Emily, she said carefully, that's a serious claim. What kind of evidence are we talking about? Audio recordings, text messages, and witness testimony from a business meeting where he accidentally dosed himself. Can you meet me at 4? Next, I forwarded screenshots of Daniel's messages with Lauren to my secure email account. Then I drafted a carefully worded message to Richard Holloway. Dear Mr. Holloway, thank you again for your time today. I wanted to follow up personally on a few details from our presentation. As you may have noticed, my husband appeared unwell during the meeting. This morning's events made me realize I need to address certain personal matters that could impact our professional dynamic. I want to assure you that my commitment to this project is absolute, and my ability to deliver results remains uncompromised. Please feel free to reach out with any questions. It was professional, polite, and vague enough to signal trouble without spelling it out. Richard Holloway was sharp. He'd read between the lines. After that, I contacted our accountant and requested an emergency audit. I need documentation detailing who contributed what, I said. Financial investments, intellectual property, client relationships, everything. By 3 o'clock, I'd also gone to the bank and opened a separate business account in my name, transferring only the funds I could clearly prove were mine. The intellectual property would take more work, but Laura would help untangle that. Daniel was still asleep when I left for my meeting with Laura. I left a note saying I was running errands and would be back by dinner. Let him believe everything was normal for a few more hours. The irony was almost sweet. He'd spent months plotting to push me out, convinced I was too trusting to notice, too naive to fight back. But he'd forgotten one thing. I built this company. I was the strategist, the researcher, the person who created the solutions clients paid for. He'd just been the face delivering my work. And now he was about to learn what happens when you underestimate the woman behind your success. At 6 o'clock, I came home to find Daniel awake but still groggy, sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of tea. The fact that he was drinking something I prepared wasn't lost on me, though this time it was just chamomile. "Feeling better?" I asked, setting my purse down, my voice carefully concerned. "I don't get it," he said, rubbing his temples. "I felt fine this morning. Then during the meeting I couldn't think straight. I probably ruined everything." "Don't worry," I said softly. "I managed to salvage the presentation." Actually, Richard Holloway seemed pretty impressed. His head snapped up. "Our presentation?" "Well," I said evenly, "the strategic analysis we developed together. I did most of the talking after you started feeling unwell." I watched his face change as the truth began to sink in. If I'd finished the presentation successfully, then his plan to watch me fail had completely collapsed. And he still had no idea how he'd ended up being the one who fell apart. "Did they say anything about moving forward?" he asked. "Richard said they'd be in touch soon," I replied evenly. "I think we've got a real shot." What I didn't tell him was about the email I'd already received an hour earlier. "Emily, after today's presentation, I'm confident you're exactly what Gravora Group needs. Let's schedule a call tomorrow to discuss terms. I was impressed not only by your strategic insight, but by how professionally you handled a difficult situation. The contract was mine. The business was mine. And by this time tomorrow, Daniel would begin to understand just how completely his life was about to change." We sat there eating dinner, him still baffled by his sudden illness, me quietly mapping out the final steps of his undoing. I couldn't help but appreciate the poetic balance of it all. He tried to drug me into professional disgrace. Instead, he drugged himself into irrelevance. And that was only the beginning. 6 months later, I sat in my new office overlooking downtown Portland, flipping through the latest quarterly reports from the Gravora Group project. The results had surpassed even my most optimistic expectations. We delivered a 22% efficiency increase and saved them nearly $4 million in the very first phase. The divorce had been swift and decisive. Laura Bennett presented overwhelming evidence of Daniel's attempted sabotage and his plans to steal the company. His attorney barely put up a fight before advising him to settle. I walked away with full ownership of Thornland Analytics, our entire client list, and every piece of intellectual property I could prove I'd created. Daniel tried to contest the settlement, insisting he'd been drugged without his knowledge. But when the toxicology report revealed traces of a mild sedative, something easily obtained but requiring deliberate planning, combined with his text messages outlining his intent to remove me from the business, his story collapsed. Completely. Lauren lost her job the same week I forwarded her messages with my husband to her professional licensing board. Portland's consulting industry was smaller than people liked to believe. Word traveled fast. Her reputation didn't survive it. As for me, I expanded the firm by 40%. I hired 3 exceptional analysts and landed 2 more major contracts, all stemming from the success of the Gravora project. The company Daniel had tried to steal wasn't just surviving. It was thriving beyond anything we'd originally imagined. And it belonged to me alone. Sometimes late in the evening, while reviewing reports in the quiet of my office, I thought back to that morning 6 months earlier. The way he'd handed me that coffee with such smug confidence, certain he was about to watch me destroy myself. How it never crossed his mind that his own arrogance might be the thing that ruined him. What I learned about revenge surprised me. It wasn't about elaborate schemes or dramatic confrontations. The most perfect revenge came from letting someone's own cruelty turn inward, while you calmly stepped aside and claimed the life they tried to take from you. Daniel taught me one last lesson. Never trust someone willing to poison your coffee. But more importantly, always know which cup is yours. In the end, justice arrived in the most fitting way imaginable. He drank deeply from the cup of his own betrayal, and I inherited everything he believed was his. As I looked toward the future, I couldn't help but smile at how perfectly the balance had shifted in my favor.